The sun will rise, the sun will rise, bringing life to the earth as it springs from the ground. The sun will rise, the sun will rise. Won't you dry all your tears, lay your burden down? Won't you dry all your tears, lay your burden down? Lay your burden down.
Welcome to week 5 of the Bible in 90 days. You should have been reading the minor prophets this last week and getting ready for Daniel and Haggai as we go into the weekend services, or I've just finished that up. I hope the reading's been going well for you. If you've kind of fallen off the tracks there, just go ahead and jump on in where we're at and finish strong with us. We'd love to see you do that as a church body. This week, as we've been studying Daniel and Haggai, myself personally have been really seeing how God is in control in the situations through not only the minor prophets, but specifically in the book of Daniel. And if you're anything like me at all, then you've dealt with moments where you feel totally out of control in your life, where you feel like nothing is going the way that you want it to, and your circumstances, the things that are going on in life just feel completely overwhelming. I can remember before being at Manuka Bible Church, as I was working just in retail and in different jobs as my family was getting started, feeling like, I didn't have enough money and I didn't have the nice things that I thought I wanted or the things I wanted to provide for my family. And it became really tough to get through the day with the mindset of I don't have control over the things that I want to have control over. It reached a pinnacle when, while working 3 different jobs, I simultaneously began to lose all 3 of those jobs and found myself without any work. For some of you, maybe you've gone through that before, where you feel like helpless in each and every moment as things come by, and you realize that there's nothing you can do to maintain the control you thought you had in your life. Well, as we look at Daniel and we look at Haggai, we're going to see how God was in control in different situations, and how God can even be in control of our lives when sometimes He feels distant, but really He is there with us. If you look back from the week before when Pastor Brent was talking through Solomon and the book of Jeremiah, you see how Jeremiah was a prophet who cried a lot as he dealt with different things that were going on in Jerusalem and with Israel and the nation as they lost everything. And when God was sending out His people, spreading them across the nations, putting them in exile, there was one thing He told them to do. And in Jeremiah 29, 4-7, He writes this: "This is what the Lord Almighty says, the God of Israel. He says this to all those I carry into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Build houses and settle down, plant gardens and eat what they produce. Marry and have sons and daughters, find wives for your sons, and give your daughters in marriage, so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in number there, do not decrease. Also, seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper." Now that's something really important we need to look at as we look into the life of Daniel. See, Daniel was a guy who was brought into this exile as a young man. Him and friends and other people who were young brought into Babylon under King Nebuchadnezzar. And the advisors to the king tried to indoctrinate the people into following after the false deities, to change their diet and to change their names even, so that way they would be forced to live in such a way that kind of excluded God from their lives and focused on what was taking place there in Babylon. And what he had to do, according to what God said in the book of Jeremiah, is to really not give in to the nature of false deities, but to allow himself to become part of the culture, and that he would live amongst the people, serve amongst the people, be friends with people. And he uses that moment to showcase that what God has in store for him and for his followers, his children, his chosen people, is far greater than what any man, ruler, or king could offer. And so he has that opportunity to serve God in his location. For us, that might be our job. It might be the town we're located in. It might be the place where we go to on a daily basis, where sometimes it just feels like, man, nothing about this is fun. Nothing about it is enjoyable. Nothing about it is something that when you wake up in the morning you get excited about. But you've been placed there for a reason. And at this point in your life, you have an opportunity, just like Daniel did in Babylon, to serve God, to share with others his truth, his grace. And just by living out who you are in Jesus, you can show them just how important God is and what God can do in your life, and that God is in control. The second thing that Daniel shows us is that even in our circumstances, we sometimes, when we feel out of control, can trust in God and know that he is in control. See, Daniel had served under different kings, and while he's serving under King Darius, who was brought in after King Nebuchadnezzar, he was a Persian who took over from the Babylonians there. He came into power, and Daniel's serving underneath him. And we find that Daniel has an opportunity that in his circumstances he can still serve God. So not just in his location, but in the things that are taking place in his life. See, Darius, he enjoyed Daniel. He thought Daniel was a great guy. And so he kept him around. But the advisors to Darius didn't like Daniel at all. And so they create this decree, and they get Darius to sign it, that you can't worship or pray to any other god, any other thing, any other person other than King Darius and what he has to say. And writing this decree, it becomes permanent. It's not something that Darius can change. And without realizing it, Darius has backed himself into a corner where now Daniel, this guy that he thinks is really great, is now put on a chopping block, and any moment he could be taken out. And these advisors, they're watching for it. They're waiting for it. And when they see that Daniel is still praying to God, that he's still going into his room, opening up the window, facing Jerusalem, praying to God, they realize this is it. We can take him out. When the advisors see this, they bring him before Darius. They let him know what happened, and Darius is distraught. He's angry, he's upset, and he spends the whole night trying to think of a way to save Daniel. And what we see in verses 16 through 28 is this. So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel, and they threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve, continually rescue you." A stone was then brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring, and with the rings of his nobles, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating, without any entertainment being brought to him, because he could not sleep. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, saying, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God whom you serve continually been able to rescue you from the lions?" Daniel answered, "May the king live forever. For my God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight. Nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty." The king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. And at the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown into the lion's den, along with their wives and children. And before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. Then King Darius wrote to all the nations and people of every language in the earth, "May you prosper greatly, for I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom people must fear and revere the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed, his dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions." So Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius, and even through the reign of Cyrus from Persia. You see, even in Daniel's circumstances there, he had an opportunity to serve God, to live for God. It wasn't just the location that he had been brought to in exile, but even as he faced lions, he had an opportunity to remain true to God and to serve him in that. And we see that it changed Darius's life. He saw how powerful God was and makes a decree greater than any other decree he had written, saying that you must be in fear and reverence of the one true God, the God that saves, the God that rescues, who lives forever, whose kingdom is greater over any domain or ruler. In Daniel's circumstance, he was able to use where he was, what was happening, good and bad, to showcase how much God is in control, how good God is, and how he could serve him even in a lion's den. For us, our circumstances can be really awful sometimes. You might be dealing with the loss of a job, as I mentioned before. You might be dealing with not having enough money coming in to pay for things like rent or a mortgage or vehicles, or you're dealing with tragedy in your life and doubts and uncertainties as you're unsure of even maybe who God is. As you look through the Bible and you look through church and you look through the people in your life, you don't know what God is trying to do through you in these circumstances, and it can be really, really hard to trust in a God that feels so distant and far away. But he's not. He's with you in the lion's den. He's with you in your circumstances. He's with you to see you come through that and ultimately use what's going on in your life to give glory to him. When I mentioned before that I had dealt with losing 3 jobs at once, and our family was going through a time where we weren't having any money come in, and we're burning through savings and dealing with a position where in our location and our circumstances, we're just kind of up in the air wondering what is happening. Well, that's when I got the call about Manuka Bible Church. That's when I saw God lead me through this doorway of being brought to a place where I could serve him and serve people in a community that love him and have their own struggles and their own issues. And my circumstances and the things that go on in my life, they're not 100% awesome just because I've been brought here. But I do know that in the middle of all that, God is in control, and that I can trust him even in the struggles, even in the issues, even in the times when I feel like he is super far away. I know in my heart that he's not. We have an opportunity to showcase the power, the grace of the one true God who is in control. And if not for our own sakes, to remember that he is, to trust him, for the sakes of the people around us who might see that and have that be the turning point in their lives, where they then see how powerful, how in control, how wonderful God really is. Now, as we draw from the book of Daniel into the book of Haggai, we see something else that's really important about serving God and knowing that he is in control. And that in our location, in our circumstances, we have all these different things to kind of understand and to deal with. But ultimately, what we have to do is make God a priority. Haggai was a prophet who during the middle of the exile was shown by God what needed to be done when the people returned back to Jerusalem, when they returned back to Israel. That their priority should be building the temple of God. That their priority should be God himself. And what God sends to Haggai in this message in verses 1, 3 through 11, I just want to read for you real quick, is this. Then the word of the Lord came through the prophet Haggai. Is it a time for you yourselves to be living in your paneled houses while this house remains a ruin? See, this is what the Lord Almighty says. Give careful thought to your ways. You've planted much but harvested little. You eat but never have enough. You drink but never have your fill. You put on clothes but are not warm. You earn wages only to put them in a purse with holes in it. This is what the Lord Almighty says. Give careful thought to your ways. Go up on the mountains, bring down timber, and build my house, that I may take pleasure in it and be honored. You expected much, says the Lord, but see, it has turned out to be little. What you brought home I blew away. And why? Because of my house, which remains a ruin, while each of you is busy with your house. Therefore, because of you, the heavens have withheld their dew, and the earth its crops. You see, the people, they were going to go back to Israel and not focus on why they had been able to return, and that was by the power of God. Their priorities were skewed. They weren't in line with what God had for them. And Haggai calls them out on that as the prophet that God had given the word, saying, when you go back, your priority should be the temple, but you're not going to do that. You're going to focus on your own houses, your own stuff, yourself, and not give God the proper place he deserves. And that is as someone who wants to dwell amongst his people and dwell amongst you. In the New Testament, it says our bodies are a temple, and that the Spirit of God dwells in us. And how often do we put idols in our lives, put things in place of God in our lives? And our priorities are messed up. I think that if we look at our location, if we look at our circumstances, sometimes those moments where we feel totally helpless, like we're not in control, like we don't have what we want to have in this life, oftentimes it's because our priorities are messed up. That we've decided to put something else in place of what should be at the top of the list, and that's God. Whether that's jobs, money, finances, relationships, friends, people, whatever it is that comes our way. It's so easy to forget God and what He's commanded and what He's called us to. And that's a relationship with Him. Not that just because God is first in our lives, He's going to give us everything we ever wanted, but because by putting Him first, we are living in according to His will. We'll have the opportunity to find contentment where we're at, to serve God wherever we're at, to serve God whatever the circumstance, whatever the situation, by putting God first and making Him the priority. You know, Paul, I think, wrote it best in Philippians 4:10-13. When he talks about his everyday circumstances and the issues that he has dealt with. We know Paul is someone who had to go through so many different things. He was stoned and beaten and thrown in jail, and time again he persevered in the name of Christ. He writes, "I rejoice greatly in the Lord that at last you renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. And I'm not saying this because I'm in need, for I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need. I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. And I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength." If anyone had a right to complain about what was going on in life, I mean, it was Paul, who dealt with so much garbage for being a Christian, for following Jesus. You see, and isn't that true that Paul, someone who had to deal with so much, realized that whatever was going on, whether he was in jail in a strange location in a foreign land, whether he was in a moment of being put to death, where he thought this could be his last breath in his circumstance, he still relied on God. He still trusted God, for he knew He was in control. And that regardless of what was going on in his life, he could find contentment in knowing that his number one priority was the call of Christ in his life, to have his identity in Him and to share that with the world. I think if we do that, we're going to see that even in our location, even in our circumstances, we'll have the opportunity to find contentment where we're at, to serve God wherever we're at, to serve God whatever the circumstance, whatever the situation, by putting God first and making Him the priority. Is that something you live for today? Is it something that you are striving for in your own life? Or have you put something in place of God as your number one priority? Do you find yourself in a location or in situations where you don't feel like God is with you? Maybe it's time you analyze that and get your heart right with Him, to turn back to Him and ask Him to be that priority in your life. It won't ever be perfect. You'll still find yourself dealing with the garbage of this world, for we live in a broken world. But know that if you seek Him first, you will find yourself in situations and in locations that, though they may be messed up, you'll find contentment being able to share with the people around you the love of God.